Okay.
Okay.
So we are now live. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to Dr. Tara Tuesdays. This is Dr. Tara. I'm so excited to be on here for this important and special conversation tonight. Tonight, I'm so honored to have join me Dr. Abena, who is a brilliant clinical psychologist. We were students together at Howard University. She has a wonderful private practice, safe space for family counseling that will healing. I'm sorry, safe space for family healing that we'll talk more about as we go through tonight's conversation. But as always, please let me know you're on. I think tonight's topic is going to heavily depend on the comments of the Dr. Tara community. And I want to jump right into it. Everyone knows what the situation is. I think this is a global situation where chaos has just ensued because of the coronavirus. And so, Dr. Abena, I want to just start by asking you, with all that's going on around the coronavirus and all of its implications, school closings, work closings, quarantines, why is the conversation around keeping calm during chaos so important to you from a mental health perspective?
I think it's important from a mental health perspective and also from a self-preservation in general perspective. Um, I like to talk about things in terms of cognitive behavioral functioning and processing, as well as mind-body processing.
Mm-hmm.
And it does feel like scary times for lots of people. That's just the reality of it. And when we think about it, sometimes it feels like we're completely out of control and there's nothing that we can do to control what happens next, to control our destiny. And that is not necessarily true.
Mm-hmm.
The way we think about a situation, even though we might not be able to control what's actually happening, the way we think about it plays a huge role in how we feel and how we respond. And it's really important to pay attention to how we're thinking about things, especially in these really scary, really unsure times, in order to help to preserve ourselves and make sure that we're functioning optimally during really stressful times.
One of the things that you said when you started was like the holistic idea of self-preservation and this mind-body connection.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I know that since the coronavirus has gotten here, there has not been a day where I could avoid seeing something, right? Even if I can cut off social media, I've seen billboards, I've seen newspapers, and a lot of times, one of the things that is always so interesting to me with anxiety, why it causes such a huge reaction. And if you're watching or listening in the comments, let me know if you've ever experienced this too. Sometimes you don't even recognize what you're thinking or feeling until it's too late.
And it happens quickly.
Yeah, like until I have that panic attack, until I'm lashing out, until I'm buying 1,000 rolls of toilet paper, right? Out of that fear. And so when you think about how people decide to get in front of it, like how do we decide to learn rather how to limit our exposure to news while still acquiring necessary knowledge? Because you do need to know what's going on.
You absolutely do. You have to know what's going on. This is a real threat to many people. Some people are immunosuppressed. Their immune system is compromised. Many of us are living with children, young children, or maybe elderly parents or elderly relatives. So this can potentially be a real risk to the health and livelihood of many families out there. So that's the truth. But also the truth is that this is a virus. It's something that there's some knowledge about. There's some knowledge about how it's being spread. But there's also lots of knowledge about how we can do things on our own to keep ourselves safe, to use good common sense when it comes to hygiene, when it comes to taking care of yourself, and just making sure that you're as healthy as you can be, both mentally and physically. And so sometimes when we get into these times of chaos, when everything feels like it's falling apart, we forget common sense. Like we forget what we actually can do to control something that feels very scary and life-threatening. But as soon as we start to believe that we have no control, we actually have no control.
Right.
And that's the important part about it is paying attention to what you can control. And what you said is absolutely true. Sometimes we have these thoughts that run through our minds. And as much as we'd like to have control over what's happening and what's happening within our own minds, at least, the thoughts already happen. And not only has that thought already happened, we've had this surge of emotion that's run through us, and maybe even some sort of behavioral reaction that's not so pleasant, like lashing out at our children or being really short tempered or not being our best selves in Target. Items. But that doesn't mean that we can't take a moment to step back and to remind ourselves of, like, you know, who you really are. Like, this is a chaos in some ways. It feels like chaos in some ways, but I believe that it can truly become chaos and become more of a long-term problem if we forget who we are in this process and we forget that we do have some control.
Can we talk a little bit about that? So for me, one of the, and I want to phrase this in an interesting way. One of the reasons why I appreciate anxiety is because it usually comes with very strong physical symptoms, right? So I remember talking this morning to a group of people, and I was saying, you know, for some of us, it's I'm eating too much. Some of us, I'm not eating at all. Some of us, I get headaches, or I'm starting to shake, or I feel it in my stomach. Right. But also with anxiety, we learn to ignore some of those triggers. And so how can people check in with, because when we talk about, like, there are things that we control, sometimes when I'm in the midst of chaos, I forget what those things are.
Right.
And so how can I use this brain-body connection to tell me, or use it to my benefit, really? How can I use this brain-body connection? How can I use the cues that my body is giving me that, hey, Tara, you're being overstimulated. Hey, Tara, this is too much. And how can I use that to my benefit to bring myself out of it?
Right, right. I appreciate what you're saying, because a lot of people don't realize that. I mean, anxiety is something that most people just try to avoid at all costs. Not comfortable. It doesn't feel great to have, you know, stomach aches is what some people get, or headaches, or what other people get. But at the same time, if you are aware enough to recognize those signs, then you also can be empowered enough to understand what those signs are actually enacting you to do. And so once you are able to recognize what those signs are enacting you to do, the next step is finding some sort of balance. So it makes sense that, you know, as we watch the coverage of this pandemic, that, you know, many of us are becoming anxious. We're watching all of the changes that are happening from minute to minute that are impacting our daily lives. And that in itself can cause anxiety. Like, your regular routine is being changed and transformed in ways that have never happened before. I mean, you've never been able to not watch
a restaurant. Right. Yeah.
A restaurant. I've never seen AMC shut down before. And it's not snowing outside, but schools are closed for 2 weeks. You know, this is something that's, or at least 2 weeks in some regions. This is something that is completely, you know, new for many people, and it can cause, that alone causes lots of anxiety. And so anxiety, like you said, and you noted before, it's a sign. It's something that kind of alerts you that in some ways you do need to take heed. You need to make some changes. You need to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself and make sure that your family is safe. However, along with that is the need to have balance. And that's where a lot of people kind of they kind of forget and kind of get off track. And that's what causes the anxiety to get out of hand.
I want to go to Shamia and Sharice's comment. Shamia asked the question, how might we maintain balance in the midst of misinformation and panic, where our attention is kind of being drawn to believing all the theories, all the things, and also feeling like if I don't get toilet paper, like toilet paper is the anti, like, the thing that I need. Right. So how do I maintain balance with that?
I'd really start first with where you're getting your information. Many of us don't really get information from the most reliable sources. Not to say that social media is not a very important tool, and especially in this day and age, it's a very important tool in getting and receiving and sharing information. And at the same time, it's really important to arm yourself with as many facts as possible. Now, granted, the facts seem to be changing at some point in time. I mean, this is something that's new and unprecedented. And even the medical experts have been very honest in saying that, there are things that they're learning every day. So there might be changes that are happening every day. And what that really means is that in some ways we just have to use common sense and use what we know when it comes to keeping your body safe, and taking care of your family. So being careful with where you're getting your information is really important, making sure that as much as possible, even though so many of us are drawn to social media, making sure that we even fact checked our friends, fact checked our families, people who may be dealing with their own anxiety and their own fear may in fact be sharing information that might necessarily be based on the facts that are available.
I want to go to Sharice's comment. I want to go to two of her comments. And she said that for her, she's saying that it's hard to get a routine in midst of this, such as setting up a school schedule, work schedule, cleaning, and making that daily trip to the market and a Family Dollar store.
Right.
And then she said balance is good, but how long does it take to adjust to this new balance?
Right. This is a new situation for everyone. And I think it's really important to remember that all of us are human, myself included. I'm a parent. I've been inducted into the the Homeschooling Parents Association overnight. And I don't feel like I got an appropriate introduction to this at all. And so it does feel overwhelming for everyone. It's important, especially in this time of social isolation for many people, to talk to other people who are going through the same thing, because I guarantee you there are other people who are feeling the same way as you. And with that being said, it's important to acknowledge that this is brand new. This is unprecedented. It makes total and complete sense for us to feel frazzled and overwhelmed at some point in time.
And I think too, and I want to go back to Sharice's comment too, because I think while you're saying too that it is a new normal, there are certain pieces of our routine that we can continue, right? So dinner time can continue, bath time can continue, right? Or is there a way where we can make self-care the foundation? Because, and this is going to Charlene's comment around the changing of the facts, because we know this, right? So anxiety for me is always reactionary. And so how do I be proactive in that? Because I know that facts are constantly changing. I can be proactive in that, right? I can talk myself through that. I know I may get some new information today. What is the minimum I need to hear? What's the baseline I need to hear? Or what's the max I need to hear? Like I'm a 2-article coronavirus person a day. Like I can't do more than 2 articles because then I start, catastrophizing.
And it's important for you to realize that and to honor that for yourself. And I don't think everyone has even gotten to the point where they know what their minimum and maximum amount of information on a daily basis is. But it's good to know for yourself at what point are you informing yourself of, critical facts that you should be aware of, keeping up to date on new developments, and at what point are you overwhelming yourself and actually contributing to more anxiety. And it's really important to kind of pay attention to how you're feeling after you watch that newscast, and whether or not you're feeling more informed and empowered, or if you just kind of pushed yourself over the line. And so I think that's a great way to put it. Like, I am a 2-article a day person. I can check it in the morning, I can check it in the evening, and that's it.
That's it.
And to be honest with you, I mean, remember, news programming is an industry. They are always trying to figure out ways to keep you tuned in, to keep you watching all day. But there's not that much that's changing from 9 o'clock to 9:30 a.m. For the most part, they're just going to find a different way to spin the same story. And you're probably going to be just as well informed if you decide you're going to get your your newscap in the morning, maybe one at midday, and then maybe one in the evening, and that's pretty much all you need. And some people could probably do well with even less than that.
Mm-hmm. Shami is asking also, what tips can you suggest that we do at home that can help with being stuck in the house for both myself and my family? With this one, I want to tap into the Dr. Abena narrative piece. That was one of the pieces that you shared during our last conversation around anxiety that got so much feedback around the power that we have in creating a new narrative around whatever our new reality is.
Absolutely. And so I think figuring out ways to kind of redefine that new normal is really important, and redefining it in your own terms, not allowing news broadcasts to define it for you, not necessarily allowing other family members and friends who might be even more prone to anxiety and worry than you are. They shouldn't be defining it for you either. And this also goes back to how we started the conversation, where we talk about that cognitive behavioral perspective. And even though we had no control in the coronavirus coming to your neck of the woods, it's here.
Right.
It is here. We have no control over that, but there are certain things that we do have control over, and that's how we choose to think about this and how we choose to see the circumstances and the facts. We can have some ability to decide that this is going to be doom and gloom, and staying home during the day and being with your children is terrible. And I hope people don't feel that way. And I hope people are able to, even though it's much easier said than done, but we do have the ability to decide that we're going to define this whole situation in a completely different light, and we're going to define it in a positive light. And one way of doing that is realizing, hey, spring break came early. You've got some way and opportunity to spend more quality time with people who you probably see on a normal basis in the morning, right before you drop them off at school, and then rushing to do some homework, rushing to get them some dinner, rushing to get them into bed, and then that's it. This really could be a prime opportunity for many people to spend quality time with those who you probably would love to spend time with, but haven't had an opportunity to do that. And those are the people who live in the house with you. But also, there are some people out there who live alone, and being in a situation where you're being encouraged to have social distancing could be really lonely. It could feel like social isolation. And so that means in some ways you have to find other ways to connect to other people. And hopefully having some access to social media and doing that in healthy ways and healthy amounts is a way to get really positive social interaction, rather than feeling like you're alone and can't interact with others, because that social interaction can be really helpful at times like this, especially when people are feeling really anxious and feeling uncertain about what's going to happen next.
And I think too, one of the things that you said that I was talking with a girlfriend about is the importance of just being honest and compassionate with ourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, I've never parented in a situation ever where I couldn't take my children to the store, where I couldn't take them somewhere where I could get a break, right? And so I can be honest about that. Like, I don't know how to parent in this realm. And so it's a learning process for not only me, but it's a learning process for them too. And I can give us all a little bit of a break in that way. And that can help me manage not only my anxiety, but also their anxiety, because their routine has been disrupted too. And you know,
I was going to say, it's really important to pay attention to how we're responding, especially when we have children watching us, because they're always looking to us for cues on how to deal with a situation like this, where, like you said, it's not just your routine that's been changed, it's absolutely everybody's routine that's been drastically changed by this within just a couple of days, maybe one day notice. So it's really important to have compassion for yourself. Yeah, this is brand new, it's unprecedented, it's never happened before. in most people's lifetimes where our routines and our ways of life have been so drastically changed. So let's be real about that first. You really have to be real and honest about that first, because without doing that, you're really not setting yourself up to be successful in dealing with this in the healthiest way possible.
I want to go to Roxanne's comment because I think she brings another point for discussion. Thank you for saying what you're saying. I've had more anxiety from others judging how I'm dealing with this. How do we manage, and you touched on that a little bit, Dr. Abena, manage our own process with the process or expectations of others? Like, what do you mean you're not going to this? Or what do you, I mean, whatever you're experiencing, but how do we manage our own anxiety to not be influenced by the anxiety of other people?
Right. That's really challenging because I'm reading her comment now. It's absolutely true that we all deal with different stressors in different ways, and it's important to acknowledge that. It's also important to accept that for yourself, even if others around you aren't acknowledging and accepting that. And I think just affirming for yourself that we're all going to deal with this the best way we possibly can, based on what resources we have, based on what's going on with us at this point in time. And if you're not getting that affirmation from others that you're talking to and interacting with right now, it may be time to take a break from that conversation. And it may be time to maybe look at another source of support that's going to be more affirming for you.
For so many people, the idea of isolation in and of itself, and you talked about that, if I'm living by myself or if I'm in the house with these children, it promotes, just the thought promotes anxiety.
It does.
And so how important is self-talk? And that goes into that narrative piece during this time. And do you have, one of the things that I've been seeing in hashtags as it relates to coronavirus 2020 is, this too shall pass. But how important is creating mantras or phrases or affirmations that we can tell ourselves when we start to see that body connection, that brain body connection getting a little bit overstimulated?
It is absolutely important, I would say, in a nutshell. And if you're not sure about how important it is, try it. Try it and see what happens. And I guarantee you that the more, once you find and identify that mantra that works for you, the more you repeat it to yourself, the more the brain circuitry is going to connect, and the more it's going to have a positive effect on you. But it starts off again with being realistic and being honest about what's happening. So the mantra can't be coronavirus isn't real. Coronavirus is real. So that's not the mantra. The mantra has to be something that deals with the facts, but also places the facts in the most positive light possible. But the facts are the facts. This is something that is real. This is something that we do have to be careful with. This is something that we are going to have to make, for the time being, some lifestyle changes for, in order to keep ourselves and our families safe. However, how can we reframe those facts in a way that is as positive as possible, without watering down and changing the facts in a way that would make us not careful? And so I can come up with a couple of different examples, but one of the most important is, like we started before, understanding that there are things that we can do in order to keep ourselves safe. We are not powerless in keeping ourselves safe. There are common sense things that we can do. There are things that we have always understood that helps us to stay healthy and safe. Like, for example, eating as healthy as you can, washing your hands properly, making sure that you sleep well, making sure that you take really good care of your body. Those types of things which we may often ignore or often forget to do because we're so worried and so tense, are in effect impacting our immune system in ways that stop us from being as healthy as possible. So when you think about it that way, if we're spending too much time worrying, if we're spending too much time thinking negatively about the facts, there are things that are happening with that brain body connection, which are in fact affecting our immune system.
And I think too, one of the things that Shamia said too about the sharing some, for me, it's always, and you and I talked about this offline, acknowledging where you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel scared right now, and yet, and for the, like, I'm a big believer that and yet I can still breathe, right? And yet I can still do a meditation, and yet I can still take a warm shower, and yet I can still call my friend on the phone. Like, I can acknowledge where I am. Coronavirus is real, and yet I can still spend time with my children in a healthy way.
Right. And yet still do things to keep me healthy.
Exactly.
And yet still go to bed on time.
Yes. That's what Brian, yes.
And yet I can still choose to have an orange if I have one in the house rather than a cookie.
Right. Or all the cookies. Right. So
all the cookies. Right. You're right. So, I mean, all of those things are really important when it comes to understanding that we're not powerless. We're not without control when it comes to keeping ourselves safe. And once we start to believe that this is just chaos and there is no way for us to control this, then we really are without control.
One of the things Sharice is saying, and this is going to go back a little bit, but I think so many people are here. I think it's hard to avoid this subject because decisions that affect our livelihoods are being made daily. And the end sentence is so powerful to me. Government has us watching to see what happens next. Yeah. And so how do we navigate all of that? That feeling that I'm pulled into this, that I have to be connected to this in order to see, is this going to be closed next? Is is this going to be extended a little bit longer?
Right. And so that again speaks to finding the balance that works best for you. And sticking our heads in the sand and hoping that this just kind of blows over is not the best option. It is important to stay connected to a certain degree because you do need to know what you're dealing with, and you do need to know the best ways to keep yourself safe. The medical experts have been really brutally honest when they say that they really don't know exactly what they're dealing with. There's not a vaccine that they can have in place for the next year. I mean, all of these things are important to know. However, it's also important to know how to balance that information in ways where you feel informed, where you feel empowered to do what you can do to keep yourself safe, rather than feeling overwhelmed.
And noticing like you said, and noticing that when I do feel overwhelmed, I can give myself permission to stop, right? Like you said, like that 2 article a day. If I notice during article 1, sentence 3, that I'm getting overwhelmed, I can give myself permission to stop right then. I don't have to read the entire article. I don't have to watch the entire news broadcast. I think so many times when we get caught up in anxiety, it feels like it's taking us on this ride where we forget, like you said, that we are in control of what we are in control of. And so I can give myself permission to stop at any time because the news is still going to be there.
And you can ask yourself, did I actually learn anything new?
Yes.
Did I learn anything new? That's
there is that question too.
Or am I just adding more fuel to this fire of anxiety? Like, did I learn anything new that's going to help me to stay safe?
One of the things that I want to ask you, Dr. Abena, is around, or for many people who, before coronavirus, I was already anxious, right? I already had lack of food, an unhealthy household environment, right? So not only am I by myself, but I may be in a toxic situation where being out of the house provided me respite.
Right.
How can I work to find self-care if my reality is less than I did? If I already had health issues or I already had other stressors, that for me, coronavirus feels like, you know what? This is just the thing that took me over.
Right. And I think actually that is the reality for many people. I mean, there's so many people who are living stressful lives, and this is the straw that has broken the camel's back or come really, really close to it. And I think when we're talking about being compassionate with ourselves, it's really important to also remember that when it comes to other people who we come in contact with, we might be handling it a certain way because we were doing okay to begin with. And yes, this is something that can be scary and anxiety provoking for everyone, but it may be affecting your neighbor or your family member in a very different way because they've already been dealing with different challenges. It could be financial challenges, it could be health challenges, it could be challenges with dealing with another family member who's going through a hard time. And so it's really important as much as possible to first always have some sort of self-care routine. And the hard part about this is that when we are experiencing additional stress, it feels like, well, that self-care routine is going out the window, where actually it's more important to do the opposite. It's really important to maintain your self-care routine, whatever it is, especially in times where you're under additional stress. It's hardest to do it then because you probably have less time and fewer resources, maybe less privacy if everybody's in the house at the same time. But this is the time where it's really important to be as creative as you can and figure out, even if it can't be, your 1 hour workout, maybe 10 minutes is better than nothing. You might not be able to get a whole hour or 30 minutes that you usually have to yourself if you're like a working parent and you usually have a little bit of time to yourself, maybe just to get into your own headspace, to meditate. But something is better than nothing. So during these times where our resources are stretched, especially thin, this is the time where it's most important to maintain your self-care routine as much as possible. And if possible, maybe even expand it.
For those people, one of the things that I keep seeing as I'm looking through the comments is just the allowance of ourselves to get acclimated to a new normal. What role do you think, how should we allow the process of grief and loss into this acceptance of a new normal? Do you feel like that is something that we should acknowledge, that our old routine, and again, we were talking about this offline, may be forever changed, or at least for right now has been disrupted, and there's a loss that many of us are experiencing, whether it's financial, whether it's physical, being able to go out of our homes. But how do we bring that grief and loss into this process as well?
Right. Well, of course, acceptance is one of the first steps, and typically the hardest step, because it's really hard to accept the fact that there's been a major change that most of us would have never chosen. There are people who are having to change really important dates. Like I know someone who's having to reschedule her wedding. I mean, can you imagine?
Right.
So, I mean, but these things are not in our control right now. And that's the fact. So accepting the fact that this is something that we are not in control of and we can still be okay is the first step and the most important step. And that is what we have to deal with when we're dealing with grief and loss, which is not in our control.
One of the things that you said also when we were offline, and then I want to get to Gianna's comment, was it's okay to freak out a little bit, because that means that you're aware. Can you talk a little bit about that too? Because I think what I'm hearing people, or what I'm seeing, at least on social media and even in conversations, is that people tend to be on one side of the spectrum. Either I am freaking out, or I'm like, you know what, it's not a big deal, right? So how do I even bring balance between the two of those extremes?
Right. It's okay to freak out. It is okay to freak out. It's also important to remember who you are We are civilized people. We're people who are typically, for the most part, we can be courteous. We can be respectful of one another. And for those of us who are faith-based, we have our faith. We have our faith. And it's really important to realize that, especially in really challenging times. This is the time where it's really important to stick to what's really easy to do when you're calm. It's easy to say God is good all the time God is good when things are great, right? But right now, if faith is an important part of your being, it's important to remind yourself of that. If mindfulness is an important part of your being, it's important to remind yourself of that. And it's also important as part of those practices to understand that we are all human. We're all going through something that is completely out of the ordinary. And it is really not typical for us to be completely calm and okay without acknowledging that this is inevitably a stressor to the entire system. And so for you to first acknowledge that and first to be okay with the fact that this can be scary, that makes complete and total sense. And then the next step is to figure out how you can remain in balance. And that means, yes, do take care of yourself. Yes, do prepare in ways that are reasonable. However, it's also important not to completely feel as if this is going to be the end of the world, because it's not.
Gianna says, how can I relax or stop being anxious once I'm done with work when my job is dealing with this virus all day? So one, just kudos to you.
Yeah. I know. And thank you very much. And that reminds me of how it's really important to separate as much as you can your work life from your personal life. And even in times where work life has to do, and I'm guessing maybe she has something to do with infectious control or things of that nature, it's still really important to carve out for yourself some personal time where you're able to completely separate as much as possible and take care of yourself.
Summer is saying, for me, my mom is 77. She has her faith, but her going out to a doctor's appointment freaks me out and makes me very anxious. I want to protect her. What do we say for the caregivers in this time, Dr. Abena?
I would honestly ask, this is my personal recommendation, ask whether or not telemedicine is an option for your mother. There are lots of different providers who are offering that option right now, especially for older adults for whom being exposed to this virus has been shown to be very dangerous. So I understand your desire to protect your mother and your concern about her. I would recommend looking into other options. And again, it goes back to understanding that even though you may not have control over the fact that your mom does need to maintain her medical appointments, you don't have control over the fact that there's a virus going on. You have control over trying to figure out whether or not there might be options to keep her safe.
And then one of the tips that I got from actually my son's pediatrician is creating, if you have to go to a doctor's appointment, creating a routine when you get home, like immediately taking off your clothes and getting in the shower, right? So creating a routine around that works to protect you, even in the midst of having to leave out of it.
Right. I think that's a great idea.
So, Dr. Abena, as we prepare to wrap up, and if anyone else has any more comments, please keep them coming. But if you were to summarize how to maintain our peace in the midst of chaos into 3 things, what would they be for us? Like, what can we give ourselves this evening and as we go into tomorrow? Because this is also information. All the news that we're hearing, this is all, and I want to stress that to the Dr. Tara community, we can either see this as the ending of something or the beginning of something.
Right.
And that's going to make a huge difference in how our bodies respond, how our behaviors exhibit themselves, and our thoughts as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so I would say that 3 really important takeaway points are to focus on what you can control.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots out there that we cannot control, but there are some things most definitely can control. And sometimes those are the most important things. Making common sense decisions about how you take care of yourself and how you take care of your family is something that you can absolutely control. Doing things that we should always be trying to practice, like washing our hands, taking care of our bodies, taking care of our mental states, is something that we have control over. And we should always maintain control over that as much as possible. The second important thing is, even though it feels like, and the reality is that many of us have fewer opportunities to take care of ourselves right now, it's really important to maintain our self-care routines. It's even more important at this time to maintain your self-care routine and or become creative to figure out how you do something to take care of yourself, especially if you have less time, less privacy, and your day-to-day daily schedule has been really disrupted.
I want to stop real quick, Dr. Abena, because I'm sorry, everyone, we were just wrapping up. But one of the things that I've also found too is because we have, prior to this moment, so many of us have just been doing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go to those of us in the Dr. Tara community that don't even know what self-care is. Like, we hear the term, but I have no idea what self-care means. I'm getting a manicure, and guess what? I can't go anymore. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, right? You know, and so what does self-care look like during this? Because I think some of us, you know, while some of us may be maintaining a self-care routine, we're going to be learning how to start a self-care routine. So can you speak a little bit for the audience?
Self-care basically means focusing on your needs, on what it is that you need to feel good mentally, spiritually, physically, and emotionally, to be your best self. And for some people, that might mean getting a manicure or a pedicure, because those things feel good. They make you feel good about yourself. They look good. However, there are other things that can be even more important, don't require you to leave the house and don't necessarily require you to spend money. The most important thing, I believe, is self-compassion. It's really paying attention to what's going on inside of you, and without judging, allowing yourself the space to just be, and allowing yourself the space to acknowledge that you're dealing with this situation in the best way that you possibly can. So that is the core of self. It's self-compassion. It's taking a moment to really tune into yourself, to really tune into what you personally need to be the best person that you can be.
I love that. Okay, carry on.
I think we were on the last takeaway. And I think the last takeaway is really to try to be creative and figure out ways to get what you need at this point in time where social distancing is being recommended. And that might mean reaching out to friends and family through Skype, through time, and avoiding isolation and being real with it. Like, some of us do not do well with isolation. Some of us do not do well without interacting with others socially. So it's really important to figure out ways to connect with others, and maybe in exploring ways where you still receive mental health care. Lots of mental health professionals are offering telemedicine sessions. So it doesn't mean that you are going to completely have to do without those interactions that are going to be helpful to you and are going to be healthy for you and really important in helping us to get through this stressful time.
And as we wrap up, Dr. Abena, I know that you are a clinical psychologist that I talk about so much. And I'm so happy to hear that you are currently accepting new clients, because as we think whether or not this is going to be the end or the beginning for us, so for some of us, this can be the beginning of us really, truly investing in our mental health. And you are doing teletherapy or telemedicine right now on your clients. So can you just share with the Dr. Tara audience how people can contact you if they're looking for a therapist?
Yes, they can. They can contact me by going online to www.safespacemd.org.
We have www.safespacemd.org.
Yes.
I just posted that in the chat so that they can go and find you and talk with you and again, use this time to really heal. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Dr. Abena, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tara. It's a pleasure.
And your insight. Next week, we're going to be joined again. We were planning to start with some of the poll responses that we got for topics that we want to see, but I want to really listen to the Dr. Tara community and see where we are next week. We will be back next Tuesday. Thank you all so much for tuning in. As always, let's heal together. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe. Stay as in peace as much as you can. And I'll see you all next week. Peace. Bye.